Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event showcasing Berkeley Law alumni who are leading indigent defense during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Bryant Yang, and I'm a member of the Berkeley Law Los Angeles Alumni Chapter. My day job is serving as a judge on the Los Angeles County Superior Court. I'm fortunate to be a double mayor and to have graduated from UC Berkeley and UC Berkeley School of Law. I also have a strong interest in indigent defense, having served on the American Bar Association's Standing Committee on Legal Aid and Indigent Defendants, which is why it is such an honor for me to introduce tonight's panelist and moderator. First, Ricardo Garcia currently serves as Los Angeles County's Chief Public Defender, the oldest and the largest public defender agency in the United States. Born in LA to immigrant parents from Mexico, he is the oldest of 7 children and a first-generation college graduate. He graduated in 1995 from UC Berkeley School of Law, and he began his legal career with the San Diego Public Defender's Office, where he handled several high-profile cases, including the longest and most complicated death penalty trial in state history, and in fact was awarded the Trial Lawyer of the Year by the Criminal Defense Association of San Diego. Mr. Garcia has also served as an adjunct professor at California Western School of Law and as the Criminal Justice Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California. He is the first Latinx public defender in Los Angeles County's history. Next, we have Mr. Stephen Garrett, who is the Chief Public Defender in Sacramento County. He's worked in the office for 29 years, working in almost every unit of the office. As Chief Public Defender, Mr. Garrett manages personnel, budgetary, and legal strategy decisions in the office of nearly 150 attorneys, investigators, and support staff. He's handled cases in courts ranging from small claims to the United States Supreme Court. He's handled cases ranging from traffic tickets to death penalty cases. Prior to his time with Sacramento County, Mr. Garrett was an attorney in private practice at a large national law firm, a legal writing instructor at UC Berkeley Law, and a clerk to the chief judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit. He graduated from UC Berkeley Law in 1983. We have next Ms. Robin Lipetzky, who was appointed to head the Office of the Public Defender in Contra Costa County in January of 2010. She earned her JD from Berkeley Law in 1986 and joined the Contra Costa Public Defender's Office in 1990. As the Chief Public Defender, she's been active in criminal justice reform both locally and statewide. She was instrumental in designing and launching the county's pretrial services program, as well as securing funding for an innovative approach where people who were cited for misdemeanor offenses got early representation. Ms. Lipetzky serves on the county's Racial Justice Task Force, which endeavors to promote policies and reform efforts to end racial disparities in the criminal justice system. She's also the past president of the California Public Defenders Association and was formerly an adjunct professor of criminal trial skills at Berkeley Law. Last of the panelists tonight, we have Manohar Raju, who is the San Francisco Public Defender and a founding member of the Public Defenders of Racial Justice. He's the son of immigrants from India, and his pursuit of justice is rooted in his acute awareness of the ramifications of social inequities. He's also a double mayor in that he holds a master's degree in South Asian Studies from UC Berkeley, and he obtained his JD from UC Berkeley School of Law in 1995. He previously worked as a deputy public defender in Contra Costa County for 7 years prior to joining the SF Public Defender's felony unit in 2008. He amassed an impressive string of acquittals and successful defenses in homicide cases, and accordingly was promoted to manager of the felony unit. To no one's surprise, San Francisco Mayor London Reed appointed him to lead the San Francisco Public Defender's Office in March 2009, and the citizens of San Francisco elected him to a full term in November 2019. To lead tonight's discussion, we have the much loved Professor Andrea Roth, who joined the Berkeley Law faculty in 2011 after 3 years as a Gray Fellow at Stanford. Not everyone's perfect. And she served 9 years as a trial and appellate public defender in Washington, D.C. Her research focuses on how pedigreed concepts of criminal procedure and evidentiary law work in an era of science-based prosecutions. Her recent articles and book chapters include the use of algorithms in criminal adjudication, the admissibility of DNA evidence in court, and spit and acquit prosecutors as surveillance entrepreneurs. She is the co-author on a leading evidence case book and a scientific evidence treaty. In 2019, Professor Roth was one of 4 recipients of the campus-wide Distinguished Teaching Award. And in 2016, she received the law school's Rudder Award for Teaching Excellence. Before I hand it off to the very capable hands of Professor Roth, I do want to welcome and note some of the dignitaries tonight. And I do apologize if I end up missing anyone. We have tonight Justice Maria Stratton, who is on the California 2nd District Court of Appeal. We have Superior Court Judges Kelvin Filler, Cynthia Lee, and Hernaldo Baltanano. We have Frank Bardsley, the former San Diego Public Defender, Michael Lewis, General Counsel of American Public Media Group, and Joan Abrahamson, President of the Jefferson Institute. So without further ado, Professor Roth, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Yang, for those introductions. And it's so wonderful to see so many alumni, including very recent alumni in the room, and also current Berkeley Law students. But in particular, it's such an honor and a privilege to realize, not that this is in any way surprising, that so many lead public defenders around the state who are leading our core of public defenders are from Berkeley Law and our Berkeley Law alums. So it's wonderful to be reminded of that, and it's so exciting to have all of you in the same room. So without further ado, one of the questions that I think would be great for students to hear in particular, but also alumni, is what inspired each of you to become public defenders. I know it may not have been one particular moment. Some of you came out of the womb wanting to be public defenders. We know we know that's what you have to say. But I'd love to, hear a little bit about what inspired you. So perhaps, Ricardo, perhaps we can start with you, and then I'll go through Steve, Robin, and Mano. Ricardo?
Well, great, sure. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome, everyone. And it's I'm looking forward to our chats in the smaller rooms as well as this larger conversation. I did not come out of the womb wanting to be a public defender. I happened to land on the profession purely by, I would actually say, chance. When I was at Berkeley, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. In fact, went to law school because my grandmother had watched LA Law and thought Jimmy Smits was a handsome lawyer in a suit and that I should be the next Jimmy Smits. No one in my family had been to college or let alone law school. We had really no idea other than what was on TV. what a lawyer was. And a dutiful grandson, I followed her guidance and went to law school. And while there, I found myself attracted to criminal law. I got into an argument with my criminal law professor about the Huey P. Newton shooting. And it became a moment of early on of contention. And so I was drawn to the subject matter, but didn't know anything about the career, the profession, quite honestly. And as I progressed in law school, I think my friends understood me better than others. And when the San Diego Public Defender's Office was recruiting on campus, someone suggested that I go and apply, that might be a good path for me. And I did. And I would say that that's what inspired me, but that's what got me through the door. Unfortunately, I was tied to this notion that, because I didn't, maybe there was something else I wanted to do. And it wasn't until I left and went to the ACLU in 2004 that I'd been doing public defense and left and came back. Well, I was there, and I really became inspired and really realized that that's where my heart was, that I was a lifer and this was the work that I needed to do and wanted to do. So I was lucky to be able to leave the ACLU, great organization, and come back to, at that time, San Diego. So that's kind of how I got inspired, and a little later than some.
Great. We're glad you left the ACLU, but agreed. Wonderful organization. Steve, what inspired you to be a public defender?
Well, a little bit like Ricardo's path. I did not start off thinking I wanted to be a public defender. I was drawn to a lot of the reasons at Berkeley, a lot of the causes and things at Berkeley. I remember suddenly getting interested in criminal law and criminal defense in my third year when I was lucky to take a criminal trial practice class there. And I went like, wow, that was a lot of fun. And I hadn't really done anything to prepare for that. I ended up moving in a direction where I ended up in a big firm, more for momentum. And my very first client that I ever had was on death row. And I handled that appeal. Everyone doesn't believe me when I say that, but it's People versus Boyer if you want to look. I saw an ad after having been there for many years, and I wanted to be a trial lawyer in Sacramento. And I said, oh, what the heck? I'm going to apply. And I don't know why they were crazy enough to hire me, but they did. And I can tell you that my first year, I never had so much fun. And I was hooked from then. And the things that inspire me, that always make me want to stay, is that you're able to really help people, and you're really working with human beings. And, in an appellate practice, which I've done, in a big firm paper pushing practice, which I've done, you're not doing that. And when you really make a change in someone's life, and you can see that, and sometimes there are people who may not even appreciate it, there's just something I think more rewarding about that. And so I was drawn to it. I don't know how I ever became the chief public defender. Didn't seek out to do that. It was never a plan of mine. I'm just sitting here today wondering really why I'm here, but thank you very much.
We know why you're here. All right, Robin, what inspired you?
Yeah, so you're going to hear some common themes here, I think. I too went through a couple of different jobs before I landed in the public defender's office. I did spend a summer working in the Alameda County Public Defender's Office when I was in law school. So I did have some idea. I knew I wanted to do social justice type work. I mean, why I went to law school, but I didn't go to law school to be a public defender necessarily. And then I did a couple years of a clerkship in federal court after I graduated, got to see sort of how courtrooms worked. And then I went into a small civil firm that did race discrimination and sex discrimination, class action employment law kinds of cases. And, that was interesting for about 6 months. And then I was bored out of my skull. And not to diss anybody who really enjoys doing civil law, but I didn't get to see a courtroom, the inside of a courtroom, for the 2 years I was at that firm, but maybe once or twice. So I had a friend in the public defender's office in Contra, Costa who said, why don't you try this out? And I applied and they hired me, and oh my God, it was amazing. And the second week I was here. I did a trial, and it was obviously the right fit. Just, so much fun, so rewarding, and it's an inspiration every day to keep doing the work.
That's wonderful. Mano, what inspired you?
Well, comment earlier that it may not be one moment, but I'll just throw a few out there. And as far as my commitment to social justice, I think that in large part comes from an awareness of my family background and my trips to India. I had an uncle, my family's from a small village, and was accused of a murder basically just because of the caste that he was in, wrongfully accused. And so I think that social justice framework is something that I carried from because of a lot of different influences, including teachers. When I was at Columbia as an undergrad on the East Coast, I was a research assistant for a critical race theory professor by the name of Kendall Thomas, who inspired me to go to law school. In law school, I was more just had an idea that I was going to defend, people instead of property, but I wasn't sure in what area that was going to be. And then I was sitting in David Coleman's evidence class, and he said, "Oh, you should check out, anyone who's interested in becoming a trial lawyer, you should check out this trial practice class that was taught by Bill Veal and Susan Hutcher, who were two really accomplished attorneys in the Contra Costa Public Defender's Office." And when I went there, I was hooked. Just in that first trial that I did in the Martinez courthouse in law school, I realized that was something I was going to do. I did do some other things, did a post-bar, but eventually there was an opening there. David Coleman called me up, and I started out in Walnut Creek, actually trying cases. And it was, as Robin said, like, I think I was in trial my second or third week, and I just loved every minute of it. I loved the caring for people aspect of it and the warrior aspect of it, of going to trial and being able to combine those two. And, it's just been something I've just continually I've just been dealing with the case in front of me and, moving here and there. And all of a sudden I became the training director, which I didn't ask for, then the felony manager, which I also didn't ask for. And then the mayor called me and asked me to be the public defender after Jeff Adachi tragically passed. So, but I was fortunate to start actually in the Contra Costa Public Defender's Office, in an office with so many strong trial attorneys, learning from people there, Robin being one of them. And, I really feel I've been inspired by other defenders and the community that we defend.
That's great to hear as well. I know that COVID is on everyone's minds. I know that each jurisdiction is dealing with things differently in terms of the amount of in-person proceedings, huge difficulties in terms of, you all talked about the human aspect and being able to help people. And, one aspect of the job that's most enjoyable is being able to actually meet your clients and see them and develop trust face-to-face. So starting with Ricardo, if you could talk just a bit about the challenges in your county with respect to COVID and being a public defender, and how you've been dealing with it. Ricardo?
That's a huge question for Los Angeles right now. Before I think, I do want to throw a shout out to Frank García. He gave me my first job as a public defender. I wouldn't be here today had he not seen, maybe he wasn't looking carefully, but it given me that opportunity. So I really am thankful for that. And I wanted to say that while he was in the group. Los Angeles, for us, I'm looking at it from two perspectives. I have the community aspect, where just 2 weeks ago, our numbers were close to 10,000 infections a day. And so infections were happening both in the office as well as in the community related to those numbers. And it was impossible to not deal with that on a day-to-day basis, and the fear that creates, and the tension and the anxiety within everybody, not just in the office, but within our community as a whole. And we were seeing it in the media, as well as the courts were shutting down, and the jails were, the numbers were growing. So there was particularly in the last few weeks, a growing anxiety as compared to what we did throughout the whole crisis. And that really has been the backdrop to my addressing this, is that there have always been two competing aspects during the crisis with regards to my responsibility. The first one being the health and safety of my lawyers. and trying to do everything I can within the department itself to make sure that we're exercising every precaution we can to protect people's health, to make sure when they go home to their families that they are healthy. And then the constitutional rights and protections for our clients. And although at times those felt antithetical, I was trying to build an environment where those weren't. But that conflict was very real every single day. As attorneys in this office who are dedicated and love their work and care passionately about their clients, knew and understood and understand that they had to be there to protect them, because if they weren't there, no one else was going to be. That they were going to be in court, the judge was going to be handing down sentences, the judges were going to be acting against our clients, and we needed to have individuals there to make sure that their rights were being protected. But at the same time, that calling, that deep passion for the work was being trumped, and probably in a way that had never been trumped in their careers before, which is their own personal safety in a way that they had none of us experienced. And not just a personal safety for themselves at work. It was difficult to fathom, but the reality that if you were infected, especially in the beginning, and even more so as it became more rampant, that you could take that home. And when you took that home, you didn't know, you may be fine, but you didn't know how your child was going to react, or your spouse, or if your parents lived with you, or anyone that was connected to your immediate life. That could be a death sentence. And that really was what was in everyone's mind. And unfortunately and tragically for us, early on in the pandemic, we lost a colleague. And that was a blow for everyone in the department. I think many of public defenders across the state, as they learned about that, were deeply affected by his passing. And although we can't say that it was because he was at work or because it was in the community, it didn't matter. What we had was an individual who did our work, was passionate about the work, went to court every day. I spoke to him shortly before he was ill, and he was dedicated to it and was sort of like, look, if I'm not here, who else will do this? If we're not protecting our clients, who else is going to do it? And that has been the ongoing conflict. There are mechanical conflicts, of course, which is the court and its addressing of the pandemic and its successes and failures in protecting those who are coming into the courts. The sheriff and the testing of clients and making sure that people that are coming to court aren't infected, or making sure that trying to make sure that people in the jails are as safe as possible, emptying out the jails and trying to get as many people out. That was an initial endeavor for us. And we started with 17,000 people in the Los Angeles County jails. And our first efforts brought that number down below 12,000, the first time in quite a long time for LA. But with the moratorium on transporting people to state prison, our numbers begin to climb again. And so all these different issues have been a daily reality. And so I don't know that there's one. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's not one single or two things that I can point to that have dominated, other than the health and safety of the client's culture, right? Because everything day to day, there are new crises pulled in with that. The economic crisis, social unrest. We were looking at layoffs. I mean, it's just been one of a unique year in my second year as the public defender. So it's all of those combined.
And just as a follow-up, Ricardo, have the attorneys in the office been able to have in-person visits? Or
yeah, the only mandate I've placed is that if we have a client in court, that they need to be in court with that client. We cannot abandon our client to the anybody who does this work knows to the hands of the court. We just can't do that. As far as any other visits, we have not expected them to go into the jails and visit. Some I have not prohibited it, and some lawyers continue to do that. My chief deputy still holds a capital case, and she goes in to visit her client with all the PPEs that she can muster, and still goes sees him. But we've tried to compensate with video conferencing, but you can imagine with a system as large as Los Angeles, that it's overwhelmed. So one of the things we did in our office was create a closed phone system so that we could reach our clients anywhere in the jails, whether they were in quarantine, whether they were in isolation, whether they were in medical, whether they were in GP, by phone. And there are phones everywhere in the jail. So that was something we were able to accomplish and assure that these were secure conversations as much as we can secure that when it comes to the jails. And so that made a big difference, giving our lawyers as well as other attorneys in LA the opportunity, APD, the opportunity to reach out and speak to clients directly. But it's been difficult and everything has been delayed.
I'm also very sorry about your colleague. That's awful. Steve, in Sacramento, it sounds like you've had a fair number of trials, first of all, compared to other jurisdictions, but what have you seen in Sacramento?
Well, I mean, I think what you just heard Ricardo say is we're a microcosm of sort of what LA's 11 million people with our 1.5 million. We saw many similar issues. We've continued visiting in the jails until very recently. We also created, and you know, I just can't understate or overstate the difficulty in trying to get cooperation from other justice partners and trying to set up iPads in the jail so we can talk to our clients. I mean, to set up phone calls in the jail. I mean, every time we get that set up, they always try and blow it up on us. And so we have that, and it's not enough. It's not enough for all to see all the clients as often as you want. And now it's not enough because we are facing, I mean, I said no one can go to jail anymore because they have out of control infections and they're not telling us about them or where they are or who has them. And I just said, that's it. We're not doing it. And we're fighting now to try and get access to that information. And, you know, we're in the same place we always are, trying to fight for that kind of thing. But you know, what I would focus on, and we've reduced the jail population substantially. I'm not sure if it's the same percentage that in LA has done, but we went from, I don't know, 3,800 to 2,300 or something like that. And then they grew it right back because that's really what, I mean, you know, there were political consequences to our DA from not fighting harder to keep the population up. And we see that now. What I would really say the issue that I think about most, and I've told the court that we're awful close to having to pull the trigger, is that we are now in a place where we are in effect or very close to indeterminate incarceration with zero access to courts. And we cannot be there. And we want to all be careful in light of our people and our clients who are in jail. But ultimately, we can't be asleep at the switch when it becomes okay to have indeterminate incarceration and no access to jury trials. And I have heard, you know, my colleague Robin talk about not exactly that issue, but the problem she's had in her county trying to get cases out to trial. We have no dates at all. You know, we can't. You set a case and you're half a year out from ever having a date, which you may never have. In terms of a drop dead date. That's the big issue, in my opinion. I mean, we're surviving. We're uncomfortable wearing masks. We've had people get sick. We have not had a blooming infection in the office. I mean, we've all had our days in the bucket. I've had my 14-day quarantine. You know, we've all been exposed at one time or another. And so we're just lucky right now. And that's what I would say the main issues really are the fundamentals about our criminal justice system. What's changing about it? And I think that's a real issue.
Do you think Zoom proceedings, well, I guess I think you mentioned before the call perhaps that there had been 60-something trials. Have they been bench trials or were they at a time before the surge where the room could be configured safely in the eyes of the officials for jurors or
yeah, I mean, it's basically jury trial in a round. If you've ever seen theater in a round, it's jury trial in a round. They separate jurors in a big circle all throughout the courtroom and they allow one or two visitors who will be the public so that they do not technically have a closed courtroom. And that's how that's happened.
Robin, Contra Costa, it sounds like 80-something trials, but I assume since the surge also a stoppage. So what have been the challenges there?
Well, yes. So many of the things that Steve and Ricardo have already talked about, but you know what was very fascinating to me, and I think when we all get beyond this and look back at this time, there's a lot of lessons to be learned about our approach pre-COVID to criminal justice and during COVID, what happened when you saw overnight, really within a week or two of the initial shutdown, the jail populations go down significantly around the state because everybody said, oh my goodness, we can't have these people in jail. Well, why couldn't that be done before? Why didn't we do that? Why couldn't those people be out of jail before COVID? Those people should never have been in custody in the first place. And it was astounding to me that all of the work that we all do, my colleagues here and throughout the state, to bring down, end mass incarceration and focus on these issues. And all of a sudden, when there's a pandemic, look at that, we can do it like that. And then when the numbers go down, oh, okay, now it's safe, we'll bring the jail population up again. Like, how are we ethically approaching this issue? Like, how can that be appropriate to let the jail populations fluctuate based on what the levels of a pandemic infection are? It's astounding to me. So I just wanted to say that, because there are these issues that just like, I just think, God, this is amazing that we are doing things this way. But in terms of, yes, so the initial shutdown, when our presiding judge, I think, was the first in the state to say, we're shutting the whole thing down. We're doing no court appearances, we had 1 day notice, no one's coming to court, we're not doing anything. And at that time, his position was, yeah, you can continue to arrest people and book them and put them in jail, but the district attorneys can't file any cases, and we won't be doing any arraignments, and we won't be doing any preliminary hearings. And I was just like, no, wait a minute. Are you kidding me? Like, due process just goes completely out the window. And it's always, it seems like, our clients who are the first to bear the harshest effects of anything like this. And so we had to litigate immediately. Now we had to get into court, we had to file our writs, we had to put a stop to this. You cannot jail somebody, keep them in a cage, and not let them go to court. Like, how is that okay? And so, but we had to litigate that. And so every step of the way, we have had to go to court and litigate for our clients to have their due process rights protected during this time, and to make the bail motions and to raise the issues of the COVID dangers within jail, right? And we had a spike in our local jail of about a month ago when the spike was happening everywhere. And again, overnight, we were able to release a large number of people, which was great. Everybody came to the table. We had the presiding judge and the district attorney and probation and my department. Everybody said, oh yeah, we got to bring the numbers down. We brought the numbers down. But again, to me, that's, yes, it's nice, but this is not how we should be approaching these things. It should be the way, this should not be what's guiding us. Another aspect of this, though, that I want to talk about that's, I think, is really a slow creep of an impact on public defenders is the social isolation. Like, we are very social people. We rely on our colleagues. We rely on each other. We come back to court and we have to process everything with this is our family. And having to do everything socially distanced, not eat lunch together anymore, not be able to come back together and process and vent about, I'm sorry, judges who are here with us, but yes, we sometimes complain about judges. But those things, we're not doing those things anymore. Never mind being able to have in-person visits with our clients, which is also really stressful. So it's sort of layer upon layer of stress that our attorneys are dealing with because of COVID. And it's, we can't get vaccinated, on and on and on.
Have you found that when line public defenders have to be explaining the consequences of a plea or going to trial over the phone to someone they haven't met, has there been, how do you develop trust over the phone? I guess maybe the answer is it's hard, but
Really hard.
yeah.
It's really hard. We're still doing visits at the jail, but all of the visits are through glass, and and even that. I mean, even you can at least look into the eyes of your client, but it's still very, very difficult to communicate that way when you're not sitting down in the same room together. So it is really hard. And we've also got the situation going on in all of our offices where our caseloads are going up and up and up because there's no exit ramp for these cases, right? You've got the courts closed down for the most part. You're squeezing out trials as we can and doing preliminary hearings, where we can. But we're not going to wholesale just plead our clients because, there's no other outlet for their cases. So we are in this sort of situation all over the state, and I think all over the country, where there's going to be this huge backlog and logjam of what's going to happen when things open up again, and how is that going to work? And again, are there going to be some restraints on what our clients are able to do because the answer to the problems have resulted in our clients, justice being delayed, and what's going to happen down the road is a huge concern.
Mano, one might be tempted to say that San Francisco is different because you have I know LA also has a reformist prosecutor now, but not quite to the same extent as a former public defender. So how have these things played out in San Francisco County?
Yes, even though we have a more progressive district attorney in San Francisco, the reality, and we were chatting about this a little earlier, is that a prosecutor is still limited by the police report. Like, that's their universe of the case. And when we do our investigation, when we talk to our clients, there's a whole nother version of the story that's going to emerge, which is going to be different than what the prosecutor has. So we have well over 100 cases stacked up past the last day for trial in San Francisco. And it is very challenging. To Robin's point, like that camaraderie, getting together in a room, discussing a case, debriefing afterwards is such a huge part of who we are. We're trying to do more. We've actually, and to Robin's point also, it's interesting during COVID times to see what's possible. So now we're able to get a lot more Zoom visits in the jail, which we were never able to before. That's an advantage over the remote visits we used to have, our phone calls, but it is no substitute for the in-person, dialogue that has to happen, that we really insist on in our office. We want everyone meeting after the arraignment. We have a pretrial release unit, so we have meetings, and those are able to be, a lot of them, some of them in person, some over Zoom. Then we also insist on another meeting within 2 days after the arraignment. And we insist on reaching out to a family member within the first couple of weeks, because we want people to see clients as part of, understand what community they're a part of. But all of those things are much more challenging when you're doing it and, standing apart from each other with a mask. But it's just a constant balancing act. But the reality is, it's always our client population that gets the worst of it. You can't just keep on delaying these trials. And even from the court perspective, when you don't have that trial event, that preliminary hearing event, generally speaking, it's very difficult for prosecutors to look more seriously at what the case actually is, unless they know they're on the eve of having to prove it. So that's also leading to a huge logjam and increasing numbers in the jail now.
Have you had jury trials since March in San Francisco?
We haven't had as many as Contra, Costa, or as many as Sacramento, but we have had about 20 or so trials. In fact, I was watching an opening statement this morning on a very serious case. So we haven't had, despite our trying to get them, they haven't opened up courtrooms in the way that we asked them to, but now they've recently started opening them up again. So we'll see if they're actually able to get the trials out that we need.
And how do you feel about how jury selection is working during this time? Do you feel like jurors are responding to summonses? You get the fair cross section, all of that, or what do you see?
Well, I don't think we ever got the fair cross section, and that's something we're working on. In fact, we're working on a little project in San Francisco where we can try to actually pay jurors who can't afford to be there, so that hopefully eventually get a fair cross section of the community. But I will say that I think in the midst of this pandemic, we also had George Floyd's horrific murder. And I feel we're in this George Floyd moment where actually people are more open to the way that, things actually are in the world. So I think some of the jurors we're getting we're able to, if we reveal truth in the way, get jurors, more aligned and open to defenses. So those things are happening simultaneously. Having said that, it's also difficult when you're having that conversation and you're talking to someone through a mask that covers up a big part of their face. So it's difficult to really know, to glean the kind of information that you should be gleaning through the jury selection process.
Believe it or not, we have about 10 minutes left until I was going to open it up for questions. And I know we already have some questions from the audience, but another question that we had talked about discussing beforehand was the fact that, when you're a line public defender, there's so much that you're doing that's reactive. You're trying to keep your head above water. When you're the head of the office, it may be that you have particular longer term goals, and that even in the midst of so many things that have to be done criminal legal system reform wise, you may have some priorities and goals yourself for the office, and a vision of what you'd like to do with your time as the head of the office. So maybe we can switch it around, start with Mano. Thoughts about particular goals you have going forward for public defense in your county?
Sure. Well, some of the things I want to do are an extension of things that, my predecessor, Jeff Adachi, was already doing, and that he would like us to be providing what he called like the best defense that money can't buy. Like, we really want people to feel like you're getting, just top shelf representation and holistic representation, that we're really seeing the full person and we're willing to fight, leave no motion unfiled, leave no stone unturned investigation wise, and be as aggressive as possible. I think it's also key, when people think about the reform that has to happen in the system, they often look to prosecutors or different policing tactics. But the reality is, we need to do a better job of educating the public that we're in many ways a public safety organization. And what I mean by that is, when you truly see someone, when you truly hear someone, when you truly fight for someone, independent of the result in the case, that seeing someone in your corner is more likely to be a springboard to someone moving in a more positive direction. And even subsequent to that, we're the last person who wants to see someone slip back into the system. So, we had a recent case in San Francisco that's gotten a lot of national attention, where there was someone who was on parole and ended up getting in an accident while allegedly under the influence, and 2 people were killed. Well, and there's a lot of the sheriff and the district attorney and the police sort of pointing the finger at each other, whereas the reality is, we should be funding public defenders to have on the ground social workers, because we already have that relationship with someone. You're not going to confine a parole agent or someone from law enforcement if you're slipping up and you're using again, but you will confide in someone from our office who has that relationship with them. So if we had on the ground people in the community, social workers, so you're having that 1 week check in, that 1 month check in, that, to see how someone's going, almost that life coach, and steering them in the direction to get their life in a more positive, going staying on a productive path. That's going to contribute more to public safety than just putting someone in a cage for a certain number of days and letting them back out, which is often what happens, and not addressing the underlying root. So I think if we could start changing people's perception of that, and we've actually started a relationship with a film production company, in part to start doing that, to start telling those stories and getting those out there. It's going to be launched next week, so you can keep your eyes open for that. But I think
wow, that's exciting. Can we go to to your website to find that? Or
yeah, it's called the Adachi Project, aka the Defender. So we'll send it out. It'll be on social media and everywhere else. So but I think we have to start telling the stories so that we can have the changes in policy that follow on. So we have a state policy director, local policy director. We're trying to, at the same time we provide the strong representation to individuals, also on a policy level, try to address the mass incarceration problem that we have in this country.
That's exciting. Robin, maybe we can go to you next. Thoughts about goals?
Yeah, so one of the things that's been a goal of mine from when I really became the department head was just addressing the structural racism that there is, not only in the system itself, which everybody's painfully aware of who has done any work in the public defender arena, but also more recently being very intentional about that within my own department and looking at policies and procedures and approaches to not just hire. I mean, that's the easy, I mean, that's not the easy, but it's the obvious thing is to hire more people of color into the department. But there's beyond that, there's really working hard to make sure that people, when they do come here, that our attorneys of color and the LGBTQ attorneys feel comfortable, feel welcome, feel empowered, that we do a lot of work, and we do a lot of work to maintain and train and retain folks once we get them into our office. And then really being intentional about opening up opportunities and promoting and, you know, getting, if you look at our demographics, and this is probably true in other departments, so that, you know, people hired in the last 5 to 10 years are much more diverse than the higher upper echelons of our department, just because that's how the story has unfolded, right? And so that's one of the things that I take very seriously, work hard on. And then I would say maintaining standards for indigent defense is always something that's I like to work on, not only again within my county, but sort of statewide and beyond, is like making sure that we have some consistent standards for the representation that we do, and the funding for it. And I could go on and on, but those are two main ones.
And the ACLU's Phillips litigation, I guess there's a consent decree now, right? Or I don't remember if it's statewide or that's some of the
there's funding, and there's an office of indigent defense
caseload and
set up, but I don't think anything is actually launched yet with that.
Got it. Steve, thoughts about goals for Sacramento?
You're on mute, Steve.
Do it. Okay, thank you. I can say my thoughts are, I think I try to focus on systemic change, and that's what I should focus on. What can create systemic change? We're in it's only recently that we even have the statistics on the racial imbalance in our jail, right? We all knew what it was because it was kind of secretly talked about, but not in a way I could cite. And we kind of had to get them on our own. And African Americans are about 7 times more likely to be locked up than a Caucasian in Sacramento, and about Hispanics are about twice as likely. That's the reality, and that hasn't changed. And it was hard to really fight it, get that information in any clear way. But you just have to walk down the settlement court, say in the hallway one morning, choose any morning, any day of the week, and you can tell. So kinds of things that I'm looking at trying to change, in addition to having, I like to think, that our lawyers will outtry and outlast most DAs. And the truth is we do. And we really have more committed and more talented people, according to the judges in our county. And we win cases that we shouldn't win, especially since COVID. But with that said, the systemic change, like I saw a study that came out of San Francisco Public Defender, and they had thrown 2 lawyers and 2 investigators, and UC Berkeley had studied it at a pretrial program, and they found that it produced some cost savings. And, Sacramento didn't really want to adopt that model. So I went out and got a grant and modified it to put social workers instead of investigators. And so my view is that where we can make changes is where we can try and help people, connect them to services. And we're working now, and I think there's been some other, I don't know if it'll end up working, trying to tap into the money from Medi-Cal and Medicare on targeted case management. And that could allow us ultimately to open up a lot of resources that the county general fund's not going to open up for us, but they might open up for law enforcement. And so I'm hoping those kinds of things can start producing some systemic change. And I would just say the last thing I want to say, I don't want to take too much time, is that I really think that we need to change the deliverables what we insist upon from DAs and we insist upon from law enforcement, we need to change the deliverables. The deliverables now are, investigate it, catch them, lock them up. That's your deliverable. That's it. Okay. And then they hold everybody accountable like it's an insurance policy if anybody gets out and does anything wrong and everyone's terrified to do anything. The deliverables should add to that. You need to be reducing racism in your community. You need to be reducing the recidivism rate. You need to be, if we're going to spend this massive amount of money to law enforcement, we should be insisting on deliverables which actually improve community safety. Because the data shows that when you take somebody and spin them in and out, in and out of prison and jail, that they cost more, they have higher recidivism rates. When you don't let people out pre-trial, they have higher recidivism rates. And when judges are not, and they have less respect for the law. So those are the things that I think we should be focusing on.
Right. Amen. We're a little bit into our question time, but these are just so insightful and wonderful to hear. So, Ricardo, I don't want to in any way.
No, you're not. And I'll be
so.
much shorter than I have been before, because I would just echo what my three esteemed colleagues have said. I think they've hit the nail on the proverbial head that we're all struggling with, we're all looking for into the future. What I'll do is maybe I'll just talk about a little bit different from looking at here in Los Angeles. Unlike the three of them, I didn't grow up in the Los Angeles Defenders. I grew up in the San Diego Public Defender's Office. And so my experience and understanding of the community and of the institution is very much married to that. And when I came here, some of you may know, I inherited what many people perceive to be a department in a slight degree of chaos, we'll say that. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that laugh. So what I wanted to do is create goals that were both institutional for the institution itself, including all the things that the others have said, but institutional change within the department here, looking at what we were doing right and what we're doing wrong, and so reflecting on ourselves. And so immediately I created a strategic plan, and I've divided the department up into regions and flattened out leadership so that we have more direct relationship between the line managers and the highest levels of administration, so that we know the services our clients are getting and the needs of the lawyers much more quickly, and it isn't getting lost in these layers of useless management goop, which had existed and I didn't understand when I got here. And it really is goop. So that's internal, but also sort of on a systemic larger idea is what is our responsibility to address the collateral consequences of contact with the criminal justice system, with law enforcement. So simple things like when our clients get detained and their car gets impounded, that car goes into impound. And for you or me or many of us on this call, we can have someone go down to the impound and pull the car out, or we ourselves can bail and get it. But for our clients, we have an extra car so we don't have to worry about it for a couple of days. For many of my clients, that car is not just their car. That car is oftentimes a lifeline to their entire home. It's the car that their partner drives them to work and drops them off in, and then goes and drops the kids off at school, and then grandma takes the car to go shopping. It is a significant part of many of their livelihood. And when that car gets impounded and the fees go up so high, they can't get it. And that impacts employment, that impacts education, that impacts access to food, that impacts such a great deal of their lives in a way that most of us don't comprehend because we're not in that real world, even though we work in it. And so to be able to address that right away, when our client comes in, oftentimes they'll say, even serious felony arrests, and this will say that you ask them, what do you need? My car's an impound. My wife needs a car, or I need to get this money out of the bank because we got to pay the rent. They're very real day-to-day things that they want to take care of immediately. And we're not always set up for that. And so we find ourselves calling friends who do different types of law and saying, hey, can you help? Hey, will you do this? And by the time we're able to connect them to other resources, the opportunity is often gone. Even though we do have social workers, even though we do have those internally, it's not enough. And so we can help them at that immediate point of touch, as soon as we touch it, to get those needs addressed right away. So then our clients can focus on the underlying issue that they're there for, which is the case, right? They can be a part of that conversation early on without worrying about whether their partner is going to get evicted, whether their kids are going to be able to get back into school, or they're able to feed their family. And so that's a long-term real goal that I want for our representation of clients.
Wonderful. So it looks like we're being granted a little bit of a reprieve, and we're going to have a little bit more time for questions than we thought. So that's good news because we have several already. And I realize that not all of the four of you will be able to or want to answer every question. The first one might be mostly for Ricardo, but maybe anybody who has a thought can jump in. So the first question we have is anonymous. Says Donald Trump was criticized for his attacks on judicial independence based on his criticisms about specific judges. Are you concerned about similar comments by DA Gascon, including requesting attorneys to complete forms on contrary rulings by judges? I think they're talking about the wanting to get rid of the enhancements that had been asked for by his predecessor. Threatened use of blanket affidavits. And if you're not concerned, are you supporting your lawyers secretly informing on prosecutors and judges?
That is a heck of an anonymous question. I'm supporting my lawyers secretly or not. I'm supporting my lawyers to do what's in the best interest of our clients. And I find this entire conversation about the judges hypocritical. And I'm sorry for the bench officers that are here and those who might be listening and who might get a copy of this recording in the future. With all due respect, which we all know what that means in public defender language, the reality is that before I became the public defender 2 years ago, I was in court practicing. And I can tell you how many times I went into court and asked the bench officer to do the right thing on behalf of my client. And I had the law behind me, right? And I had the statute behind me. And that bench officer turned to the prosecutor and said, well, what do you want to do? It's up to you to dismiss the case. It's up to you to take this action. It's up to you to do whatever it is that the public defender was asking you to do. And of course, the DA said, well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to dismiss in the interest of justice. We're not going to change the filing. We're not going to allow him to withdraw his plea. We're not going to do all the myriad of things that the judge had the power in insisting and asking them to do. And now that the tables have turned, now that the prosecutor is standing with us, demanding and insisting on justice, those same bench officers are saying, well, we don't have the authority. The DA doesn't have the authority to do that. We have the authority. We're not going to do it because we don't think it's the right thing. I am not going to begin to get into a conversation about whether or not, you can tell me a little bit passionate about this, whether or not the judges need to be pampered. The people that need to be taken care of and do the right thing for are my clients. That's who I represent. I am a public defender first. I'm not an advocate for the bench, and I'm not an advocate for the DA. And if the DA is doing things and wants to do things that are going to benefit my client, I am in no way going to stand in the way of that and suddenly say, well, that's just not the right way, and we're going to passively engage the bench. That's just not going to happen, not at least from me. And I think I'm so proud of my lawyers because they're not doing it either. They're there demanding the same things they've demanded all along. They've just got the DA's directives behind them to ask for, which is a first, I think, for many of us.
All right, I can move on to the next question unless anybody has anything to add. But I'm guessing there's some agreement, perhaps. All right. So I think I may have asked Robin a version of this during our talk, but Gabby Bermudez, who's a 2L here in my criminal procedure class, asked, building trust with your clients is an important part of being a public defender, especially when you're working with people of color who have reason to distrust government institutions. How have public defenders in your office adjusted to COVID, impacting their ability to build trust with clients they've never met in person? And, I know we've talked a bit about that, but I do get this question from students a lot. How do I build trust with someone with whom I might not have a lot in common and, can't know what they're going through? Thoughts about that issue and how you tell your lawyers how to deal with it? Mano?
Sure, I can address that. I think first I would say just time. I think it's really important to spend time with your client early on in the case. In our office, we have a practice that we encourage to have the attorney talk with the client about something having in the first meeting, having nothing to do with the case. Like, tell me about your favorite godchild. Where'd you go to high school? What kind of music do you listen to? Something beyond just the actual case. You get to know that person more deeply, because there might be times in court where you don't have as much time and it has to be sort of a quick interaction, let's say in a calendar call. But that client should know it's not because you don't care about them. It's just right now you don't have a lot of time, but there'll be time later on. Also, I think it's crucial to reach out to just a family member. A lot of times, defenders will get calls, maybe the calls don't get returned or your voicemail gets full, but if you affirmatively reach out to someone in your client's family and let them know what's going on in the case, where you are, what your plan is, you don't have to get into the details, but that you're going to be aggressively defending the client when the preliminary hearing is, when you anticipate the trial will be, things like that, of course, with the client's consent. That's another piece. And when that client knows that you've reached out to a family member, that's another trust building piece. And then I think it's really important to, be out in the community too, because I think you just get a better feel for things. If you go out with your investigator, or if you go out and meet character witnesses, whether or not you're ultimately going to call them, that makes a big difference. Many people here may have seen the movie Just Mercy. I think you remember when Bryan Stevenson went out to the home of one of his clients. First of all, he found alibi witnesses that no one had ever bothered to contact. But secondly, I think it was Jamie Foxx, I believe, I think so, who was his client, who said, no one's ever gone out to my home before. Like, I trust you now. So I think there's lots of things you could do like that, but I think it's just, and then showing up with confidence, because clients want to see defenders who are confident. And that's a big piece.
I know everyone on the panel will have an amazing answer to that. I'm tempted to move on because there's so many wonderful questions, but the next one, Robin, if you don't mind taking this one, there's a question about female public defenders and, whether you feel safe. I know that with a lot of my students, they ask also about, can I be a feminist and also be a public defender who is defending people who may have committed sexual assault, et cetera. Thoughts about how you navigate that, or tell your line attorneys to navigate that?
Well, let me take the second part of your question first, because that's an easy one. You can be a feminist and defend someone accused of sexual assault the same way you can be a human being and accuse someone, defend someone accused of any crime. Our job is not to judge. Our job is not to decide what the facts were. Our job is to defend that person and make sure that they get the very best defense that they can get. If you're an individual who feels like there are certain crimes that you cannot, feel comfortable defending a person who's accused of those types of offenses, then this might not be the job for you, whether you're a man or a woman. It doesn't, matter. I think you have to approach this work with the mindset that you can see your clients as multifaceted human beings who are accused and not convicted, and your job is to muster everything you can possibly muster within you to defend them to the very best of your ability. And if there's anything in your makeup that's holding you back from being able to do that, then this is not the right job for you. That's really what I would say about that. Obviously, there are offenses and there are going to be situations that are traumatic for the attorneys. I mean, we deal with vicarious trauma in our jobs all the time. But again, I think that's something that you have to acknowledge and recognize and be able to talk through with your clients and understand when you're dealing with that situation, but you can't let that get in the way of being able to defend your clients. In terms of feeling safe, I have never not felt safe. I don't know. That has not been an issue for me. We have had attorneys And I think probably in every office there are attorneys who have had some kind of threat, physical threat. We've had attorneys attacked, and that has happened on very rare occasion. I personally have not felt that my safety was an issue as a woman in this job. So, I mean, I think we need women in this profession. I mean, this is like my office now, I think, has about 60% of the lawyers are women. So I think I would encourage women to definitely enter this profession. There's no one right way to be a public defender. There's no one right personality. There are wrong personalities, but there's no one right personality. That's what I would say.
Steve, I don't want
to just jump in real quick.
Yes,
I just want to emphasize Robin's last point. I think that is so important to be said, is that there is no one right person. That is the beauty of the work we do, the diversity and the plurality of ideas and approaches. You just have to believe you're the best person for that case at that time. But I thank you for saying that, Robin. I really appreciate that person that was great. Thank you.
I do. I also want to just, our students, sometimes I hear, well, I'm soft-spoken, I'm not sure if juries will like me, thing. And it's, that the authenticity and the believing in your client, that has nothing to do with, public speaking per se. That's really nice to hear. And again, Steve, I don't want to put you on the spot. A couple of the other questions we've have had to do with racial justice and the California Racial Justice Act, or defund the police, and just wanting to hear from anyone, not necessarily you or just you, but what your thoughts are on the defund the police movement, maybe how you as a public defender see how you fit into all of that. And if you have thoughts on the California Racial Justice Act too. But.
So, I mean, I think that act became law while all courts have been shut down. So we're about to see what may happen with that. And I know we've all been looking at that and examining that in our own offices and searching for data. So let's hold the answer to that question, because until we file briefs and start doing things, I don't want to start commenting on that. But I think that's going to be a big subject of litigation. In terms of defund the police, what I would say is that it is, and I mean this with love to all of those, the public defender here, but Sacramento and Fresno and San Bernardino and Riverside, we're not part of the coastal elites. We have a really different political climate that we exist in. And so what I can do politically is different than what any one of these other three. And every county has got different politics. And we know that offices that get just destroyed because they get too political, depending where they are. So I'm going to hold that answer in terms of defund the police, because that's going to create a firestorm in my office or in my county. I will say this, that we are always meeting with people who are in, their position is that the police should be defunded. I think it's more appropriate to be less polemic, at least in my county, and resources need to be reallocated. We need to be allocating resources for people, not locking people up when they don't need to be locked up. And I think that's where we should be focused. Defund the police is a very polemic thing, and you will not have support in my county from the majority, really probably from almost anyone in terms of the political powers that be. So I think that would be counterproductive to be saying we're in favor of defunding the police, because the first question then is, what do I do when someone's breaking in and threatening my family and there's no one answering the call? And so I think I don't think that's a productive debate. It's certainly not in my county. And if other counties can talk about that in a productive way, I would probably still have a difference of opinion on that, because I don't think we're liable to move the debate in the direction where it should go from our perspective. And San Francisco is a little different because, Mano's elected, right? And none of us are. And so he's consulted with, what does this elected official think? I don't think any of the rest of us really are consulted that way. The most powerful people are the ones elected countywide, and those are only a sheriff and DA in my county. Anything different in your county, Ricardo or Roth?
Obviously, our board of supervisors.
Yeah, but aren't they? They have a geographic area. They're not countywide, right?
Right, the DA and the sheriff.
By the way, one of our questions is a comment from Maria Morga, Class 98, noting that their office, the Office of the State Public Defender, has a new mandate related to diversity in hiring along the lines of what Robin was talking about. All right, if I can, looks like I have permission to ask one more quick question. There actually is a quick question from a recent grad that I think should be quick, if depressing, to answer, which is, what's your hiring situation given COVID? Are you hiring? Is there play here? Can they get jobs in your offices? What's the story? Mano, maybe we can start with you.
Well, we're in budget season right now, so it's a constant issue. And sometimes, our view is we shouldn't be cut because of the vital services we need. They should take it from other places, and we're going to keep on pushing for our funding. But having said that, we have openings, we hire, and if someone's interested, they should reach out. They can go to our website, and also, we have a strong internship program. So there's definitely ways that we can support people and potentially hire.
Right. Robin?
So we run a recruitment about every 6 months for entry-level attorneys, and it's all run through the county HR department. So you can look on the website there. But I would say that anyone who's interested in working in our office, the best way to do that is to do an internship or a summer clerkship in our office. And then we have post-bar positions. And that's another great way to get sort of your foot in the door in our office.
Great. And before I move to Steve, there's a note in the chat that Federal Defenders of San Diego is also hiring both trial and appellate attorneys and currently interviewing. Okay, Steve?
Well, we hire when we have openings. We've just finished a round of hiring of quite a few lawyers, but that's in part been due to people who left and maybe due to COVID, maybe they just wanted to leave. We all faced a real budget problem, and we still don't know what's going to happen in this round, but I think that there was far more uncertainty coming into September, and my county's budget was all just thrown down the road to September. And so there were a lot of us leaving positions open as they naturally came open. And we've filled those attorney positions right now. We just filled a whole bunch of them, including several from UC Berkeley.
4 Berkeley law grads, sounds like great.